You're very welcome to Sunday Sequence. If you're just joining us, I'm Audrey Carville. Now we're going to have our main discussion this morning, and it's been prompted by a week of tragedies, both here at home and abroad. And the question for our panel is whether faith or simple hope really can take us through the worst of times. Is there really any difference between faith in God or a God, or simply having a positive attitude? We're going to discuss this now with Presbyterian Minister, the Reverend Cheryl Meban, Michael Nugent from Atheist Ireland, and Jane Shaw. She's a craniosacral therapist and Jungian psychologist, and you're all very welcome indeed. And Jane, perhaps you're new to the programme, and you're very welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
Would you explain for our listeners just what you do briefly?
Certainly. Yes, I am what's called a craniosacral therapist and Jungian psychologist. And a craniosacral therapist is someone who I work with people who have suffered trauma, and I help them find a way back to health and normal living after big, overwhelming experiences, by reconnecting with what we might describe as a higher intelligence, a higher healing force within their body, and a body awareness. So it's about bringing them into the present moment, and having empathy for themselves, compassion, and feeling their experience. A Jungian psychologist also works in a similar way in that it brings people to the experience of life, but looks to something greater than ourselves as individuals.
Okay. Well, we'll explore as we go the influences on that and of that. And Cheryl, it has been a dreadful 7 days. So much tragedy on a small scale to a large scale, and the pain and the grief is the same. In the face of such an onslaught at times like this, and we've had them from time to time, how do you deal with it?
I cry out to God, primarily.
In anger?
Sometimes in anger. The main thing is to be honest, and not to pretend, because there's no point in pretending anyway. God knows more than we do. And I don't really want to spend the time today discussing there is or isn't a God. But for me, the experience has been that there's a promise that we are deeply loved and deeply valuable. And then when you see massacres and floods and crushes and terrible things, it does make you think, well, what's going on? Are these people not valuable to you, God? And so we cry out on their behalf, and we cry out for ourselves and our helplessness. And I find in the scripture and in the Psalms, company throughout the centuries and across the world with people who have experienced great loss and great hardship and great pain and all the same questions that we have. And so we're not on our own in this, and we journey together with it. We can learn from where people have been before. And there's wisdom there too in the Psalms and in the different ways that people have tried to challenge God, or to sometimes placate God, sometimes put God in a box, and learning from all of that in my Christian life, but also just being alongside people who are suffering today. So there's been a few sad things that I can't talk about the individual people concerned, but I was able to say to them, what does it mean to you? What does your faith mean to you? Where do you find your hope in the midst of, the loss of your child or whatever you're going through? And I'm amazed at the responses that I hear from those people today, the depth of maturity and the strength of commitment to being related to people, and that we're more than just stardust, we're more than just molecules, and that the love that is at the heart of the universe, which we put in terms of the Creator, in whom we live and move and have our being, that he holds us together and has purpose beyond what we can understand.
Okay. Michael Nugent, Michael from Atheist Ireland, you're very welcome. The same question really to you, Michael, in the face of such tragedy, how do you deal with it? How do you face it?
Well, I should preface it by saying, of course, that atheists react in different ways because we're different people. But on a personal level, I mean, there are two types of tragedies. that I would have had to deal with. One is the death of my younger brother when I was in my teens, my parents, my wife. And then at the wider level, there are atrocities, close to home. We've had a lot over our lifetime in Northern Ireland in particular, and elsewhere. And the way that I deal with it is, first of all, by recognising that we all as human beings have empathy and compassion and senses of reciprocity and cooperation and fairness and justice. I'm going to try to channel my depression or anger into those rather than into the other stages of grief, which are denial and bargaining. And then ultimately you reach acceptance. I think David Kessler, who wrote the book with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the 5 stages of grief, which are denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance, he's since written another book adding a 6th stage, which is finding meaning. And I think that's the key to it. You find your own sense of meaning that arises from it, and you channel your feelings into that. For example, when my wife died recently, I've channeled a lot of my work into campaigning for assisted dying, which is something that meant a lot to her because she died of cancer. And at a societal level, when the euphemistically described troubles were happening in Northern Ireland, I was involved in organising protests outside the Sinn Féin UDA offices, organising flowers and condolence cards from people from the Republic to this society, the local societies that had experienced atrocities in Northern Ireland, and then political lobbying. So those are the type of things that I do. I try to work towards work towards minimising the impact of future events like that on other people.
And Jane, to bring you back in at this point, most of us weren't directly affected by the events of the past week, but yet we're still impacted by them at this distance. So how do we deal with them? How do you deal with them?
I think following on from what the other two have said, it's not about denying what's happened. It's about really feeling into how we do respond, and also knowing that there is another possibility as well. So if I see what's happening in New Zealand, my initial response might have been to be angry, to have felt all those feelings of rage and anger and despair in my body. And then to see that something else has come through now, to see how the community has come together, and love, compassion, empathy, support. That's really what has balanced out to some extent the atrocities of the killings there. And I think for me, in whether it's a huge situation or whether it's a smaller situation, it's about being with what is and not denying that, but also knowing that there is another possibility, and maybe orienting towards those qualities of compassion, presence, empathy, and connection to others.
Cheryl, where does hope come in to this for you?
Well, I would like to follow on from what Jane's saying. When we find that there are events that are just so unbelievably horrible and evil that we don't think that there is any way, the Holocaust, there's no way of balancing that up with goodness and saying, well, people were kind to each other and that's okay then. But to know, as I sense it very deeply, that God was with us in Christ, and not avoiding pain, not glossing over it, but coming and experiencing our human experience on our pain right to the depth of hell. And so God is with us in what we're going through. So it's the kind of counter narrative to the kind of Greek view of Zeus throwing down thunderbolts from heaven. God comes down and acts as a lightning conductor. And don't ask me where the lightning bolt came from. That's a whole problem. But God chooses to be with us and to take the heat and to take the pain and to transform it and to make it possible to be more than the victim, and to become the victor through love, through persevering, and through the gift of life that is given to us the promise of it at Easter with resurrection, but that we find in many signs, as Jane was saying, the kindness and the compassion of the people in New Zealand really speaks of the capacity to transform something negative into something incredibly positive, and I see that as testimony. Jane?
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's the transformation. It's the transformation through the relatedness, through the interconnections, that realising that there is something bigger than us as individuals.
Michael?
Well, I don't think it's a question of hope. I think what it is closer to is resilience. And I think that there's a lot of study in recent decades by a group of psychologists who call themselves positive psychologists, who have said, that psychology has taught us a lot about and researched a lot in proper scientific terms, about depression and psychosis and neurosis, but there's not enough study done on positive emotions like optimism and hope and strength and resilience, and they've done a lot of research on that in recent years. And one of the things that I find very interesting from an evidence-based perspective is that lottery winners typically a year later are about as happy as they were before they won the lottery, and paraplegics a year later are about as happy as they were before they became paraplegics. And it's because one of the things with humans is we're very good at and in fact too good at recognising how good things are and how bad things are in the moment. But we don't recognise how resilient we are and how we can adapt and how we can get beyond, regardless of how we do it, regardless of whether we do it through religious beliefs or through secular beliefs, but that we can move beyond these, and the old time heals all does actually show to have a basis in scientific research.
So, Michael, putting hope in ourselves is really another way of saying we have resilience.
Yeah, except I don't think it's hope. You see, I think the problem is when we talk about faith, we typically associate faith with religion. But you can have faith in secular projects as well. People have faith in communism. People have faith in the unregulated free market. I'm sure people had faith in 2016 that Brexit would be easy. But ultimately, reality intervenes, and we have to adjust our beliefs based on reality. And I think that there's a lot of evidence now that shows that we are stronger than we think we are, and that we can get through these things. And I think a lot of it is working together. And like, for example, say if we take recently here, Atheist Ireland obviously believes that reason and atheism is a more reliable worldview than religion. But we also work with religious people, including the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the Evangelical Alliance on secular issues. And when recently the Ahmadiyya Muslim mosque in Galway was attacked by vandals, Atheist Ireland were the first people there the following day to stand alongside them and to show compassion and empathy and solidarity. And so I think that's very important in these issues, is that while we can and do strongly disagree on the nature of reality and the nature of morality, that when tragedies arise, we can and do stand alongside each other and work together.
Cheryl.
Yeah. And Michael, I'm just so glad that you're saying that, because Jesus affirms to us that it's not what we say we believe. So faith isn't just an abstract system of thought and belief, but what we do, how we treat the people made in God's image, is how we treat God. And so our faith shows itself not by our metaphysical notions, but how we actually engage relationally. So faith is an active thing. It's about our faithfulness, and actually the Greek word in the New Testament for faith and faithfulness is the same word. So there's a whole dichotomy. It's not a dichotomy. It's a bringing together of what you believe and how that makes you act. That's really easily lost in Christian faith, and shouldn't be lost in Christian faith, because Jesus was central to saying, it's not who calls me Lord, Lord, but those who do the will of God, which is to love each other and to love our enemies. So what you've just described is a very good example of that, how you have acted by faith, even without naming God, but my understanding of God would be that Jesus has said that you have responded in a godly way by showing up and being there.
Well, can I clarify that I wouldn't consider what we're doing to be acting?
No, you
on the basis
wouldn't.
of
But
faith.
I'm saying that I would.
I think that. For me, faith is believing things disproportionately to the best available evidence, and as I say, I'm not restricting that to religion. I'm saying it can equally apply to secular projects. But what I base my morality and my interaction with others is on evolved human attributes that are common to everybody. As I say, like empathy, compassion, reciprocity, cooperation, fairness, justice, and those things are natural. Now, religion to me is an extra element that complicates those natural reactions. And if we go back to the faith being possible with religious and secular projects, the difference between those is that with faith in secular projects like communism or the unregulated free market, you eventually realise, because it bumps into reality, that you have to change your views. But because religious faith hides its testability in an afterlife, it means that it doesn't come up against those checks and balances. And so you can get people, and obviously I'm not for a moment suggesting that this is yourself, Cheryl, but you can get people who do believe that gods are telling them to do horrible things, and therefore do them because of faith.
Yeah. OK, we are discussing the merits of faith as opposed to hope or simply a positive outlook on life. This comes after a week of dreadful tragedies both here and abroad. We're in studio, Presbyterian minister the Reverend Cheryl Meban and Jane Shaw, craniosacral therapist and Jungian psychologist, and Michael Nugent is in Dublin. He's with Atheist Ireland. Jane, for you, what is faith's relationship to hope? Both being theological virtues, are they two sides of the same coin? How do they work? How do you use them in your work?
Well, referring back to what Michael and Cheryl have both mentioned is this idea of resilience and experience in the moment. So for me, faith is... It's an interesting word because it's for me it's an experience of that there is another possibility, and can we feel that in our body? So we might feel the rage and the anger and the grief held in our heart by a contracted body. We might feel our throat close up. We might get a headache. Is it possible to let go of some of that, to relax, to express ourselves in an authentic way which allows us to feel that we can return to who we really are rather than being conditioned by the experience around us? Yes, if we are... where for me, the idea of another possibility and being reminded that there are these feelings, and it for me it's an embodied feeling of love, compassion, empathy, those more related qualities. Can we remember that they are there within everything, so that for me the danger is the God who's telling us to perform atrocities. That to me is a very dissociated way of behaving. It's not being here in the present moment, because if we're here in the present moment and related to each other, we act from the heart. We act from a place of compassion and empathy.
And the Christian faith clearly... I think we're using different definitions of faith, which is why we're sort of talking at cross purposes. It's quite clear that there were religious people who put Jesus to death, who sacrificed him allegedly for the good of the nation in order to protect the status quo. So were they acting in God's will? I don't think so. Were they acting out of love? Well, they might have argued that they were. Were they being faithful? God only knows what their heart was doing at the time. But my understanding of faith is that it's acting in faithfulness towards the character, the loving kindness of God, that I believe is at the heart of the universe and that binds us together and that makes all relationship possible. So So to kill somebody in cold blood like that is not to be acting in faithfulness to the love of God. And I don't believe that that's who God is. But that's my sense of it, and I do understand that you're...
And to bring in the concept that Michael was referring to, this idea of resilience. If we act in that place, we're not acting from a place of resilience. We're acting from a place of actually quite disempowered behaviour. We're acting in a high state of fight or flight, of anger, of rage.
Michael, just finally, I suppose, is it always right to maintain hope, even in awful times? Do we sometimes have to yield to negative forces, to admit reality, and perhaps ultimately that can lead to positive transformations?
Well, of course. I mean, that's the whole point of an evidence-based worldview, is that you do try to find, you'll never know exactly what's true, but you try to find what's closest to being reliable in terms of what the evidence suggests is true. And so one of the things, for example, if you're talking about reactions to tragedy, atheists can look at a tragedy more realistically, because we don't have to wonder why God let it happen. We don't have to wonder why God saved one person and let others die, or how God can help us to get through the tragedy, or what supplications that we have to make to the God in order for him to help us. And those things, they kind of tie in with the denial and bargaining stages of grief. So we don't have to go through those. So we can more easily get to the stages of acceptance and seeking meaning because of that.
Final word to you, Cheryl.
I'm just not sure that it's the belief in God or not belief in God that helps with that, because somebody who believes in God can equally accept and say it is well with my soul.
Jane, final word.
For me, if we can have an embodied experience where we know there are other possibilities, we can live a more authentic and empowered life.
Well, we thank you all very much for taking part in our programme this morning. Jane Shaw, the Reverend Cheryl Meban and Michael Nugent. 81771 is the text number for your thoughts to Sunday Sequence this morning. It's 9:26.